Hi, my name is Nadia. I'm a second year in computer science, and here at Mines I'm involved in WISEM and planning E-Days. I study computer science because it's the future and never fails to excite me. I welcome you to the CS at Mines Python video. Today we will discuss for loops in Python. But first, here's a quote. If you get tired of writing for loops, take a break and continue later. You learned about break and continue in the last video. With while loops, well, you can also use break and continue with a for loop. Before we start talking about for loops, let's do a quick review on while loops. We know we can iterate over a list using a counter variable in a while loop. Take a look at the code shown. What will be printed to the screen? I suggest you pause this video as you determine what will get printed. Hopefully you realize that the while loop will iterate over the full list, thus each element will be printed to the screen. If this code is confusing, please come to office hours for help. Let's move on to for loops. Similar to while loops, you can iterate over a list in Python with a for loop. In fact, there is a range-based construct that can be used with a for loop. That is, if you want to loop over a list, see the general form for doing so on this slide. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, we will iterate over the same list we used in our previous while loop example. When executed, the variable item will be a specific element in the list, which will change each time the loop iterates. In the first iteration, item will contain the element at index 0. In the second iteration, item will contain the element at index 1, etc. Thus, the output for this simple code is the same as the previous example. Let's look at the general flow of a for loop iterating over a list, as shown. We execute the code inside the for loop for each item in the list or sequence. If another item exists, we execute the code inside the for loop again. Once we have executed the code inside the for loop for each element in the list, then the for loop stops, and the program continues with the code immediately after the for loop. We can also use for loops in other ways. For example, Python allows you to easily generate a sequence of numbers with the range function. The syntax for using this range function is shown on the slide with 3 parameters. Parameters are the variables that the function expects. The first parameter the range function expects is the number you would like to start with. The second parameter is the number you would like to stop with. And the third parameter is the step, or how much you would like to increment the numbers within the sequence. Now you know how to read this code. I suggest you pause the video and figure out what it will output. Did your answer match the output? We encourage you to be careful with the range function. It's common to expect that the 3 have been part of the output, but since it is our stop point, it will not run the code inside the for loop when I is 3. The point of this slide is to note that step is optional. If you choose to not include it, Python automatically assumes step is 1. In other words, if you only have 2 inputs into your range function call, the interpreter will assume that they are stop and start. Here's the previous example without step. Since step was 1 in the previous example, the output is the same. Similar to step, start is also optional. If you provide neither start nor step, the Python interpreter assumes that start is 0 and step is 1. Here's the previous example without start or step. Since step was originally 1 and start was originally 0, the output did not change. Since start and step are optional, you can easily repeat something n times with the for loop and the range function. Here is an example showing that. How many times do you think Python is awesome will print? Since n was set to 3, Python is awesome will print 3 times. Look how easy it is to do this with the for loop and the range function. In summary, you use the range function with 1 to 3 values. Think about what differences exist in the 3 range function calls shown on the screen. If you understand how start, stop, and step work, your answer to this question should be no difference. Here are some other examples using the range function. We suggest you pause the video to ensure you understand the different examples shown. Time to practice your new skill. For each of the examples shown on your screen, write out the range function in as many ways as you can think of. We now encourage you to trace the code shown and determine what the output should be of this nested loop, which means 2 loops used together. That is, first, trace the nested loop on the slide by hand. We suggest you use a pencil and paper to keep track of the values stored in the variables I and j, as well as writing down what the code will print. After you have finished tracing the loop, type the loop into a Python file, execute it, and check whether you were correct or not. We'll give you a second to pause this video so you can work through this practice problem. Alright, one last example. Can you determine what the output will be with this code snippet? Again, please pause the video so you can first trace the code by hand and then type it in and execute it. That concludes our video. We hope you now have a good understanding of how for loops and the range function work within Python. We encourage you to launch your Python interpreter and practice. Thank you for tuning in. See you around campus.